core of almost every game, you will find the gameplay loop. Regardless of whether you're playing a huge AAA action game or an indie visual novel, you're going to have a set of repetitive tasks you will be completing over and over again, whether you notice it or not. When I think about some of the greatest gameplay loops, my mind takes me back to a 2004 Flash game called Motherlode. The premise of the game is simple. You play as a drill, and you have to dig into the earth and gather minerals. The catch is that you run on an extremely limited fuel tank, and perhaps more importantly, need to make your return trip back to the surface on this same tank. That right there is all you need to know. This simple set of mechanics forces you to make decisions with every move you make. Each additional dig you make down is one more step you'll have to climb on your ascent. Do you risk it big and try for some more minerals? Or do you play it safe and go back with a small haul? Regardless of whether you strike it rich or avoid the risk entirely, you could purchase some upgrades and repeat the process all over again. This exact gameplay loop exists in 2013's SteamWorld Dig. This is the third game developed by Imagine and Form International AB, who created some DSi and mobile tower defense games prior and have since gone on to create two new SteamWorld games, one of which is a proper sequel to the game we're talking about today. As per usual, guys, I'm going to be talking about the game in its entirety, so spoiler alert. You play as Rusty, a steam-powered robot who comes to a dilapidated mine at the request of his Uncle Joe. While taking your first steps into the mine, you discover Joe's corpse and loot from it his trusty pickaxe. With it, you can begin your ever-important descent and the very loose objective of trying to find out what happened to your uncle. Yeah, this game is pretty much Motherlode, except fleshed out into its own game. You have your limited resource that influences how deep you can go. In this case, it's light that slowly runs out. The pickaxe you start out with digs really slowly, taking multiple hits to get through even the most basic patches of dirt and rubble. Eventually you'll be chipping away at the minerals themselves and returning to merchants at Tumbleton, who will reward you for your troubles. There you can also purchase upgrades to your pickaxe and make your next plunge just that much easier. The pickaxe isn't the only upgrade you will acquire. No, as you venture deeper and deeper, you will uncover more and more buried treasures and long-forgotten techniques. This game is kind of a Metroidvania, as these new techniques will allow you to access areas you couldn't prior, as well as just making the general digging that much easier. Probably the most important unlocks you'll get on your journey are the drill and the rocket arm. The drill allows you to dig far faster than your pickaxe, as well as dig through stone. The rocket arm lets you dig at a range. The catch is that both of these things run on water, which is another limited resource in the game. It doesn't regenerate each time you head back up to town like your light does. You have to pump it from pockets that are found randomly below ground. Be careful about digging indiscriminately. Rusty can dig in all four directions, but he cannot dig while midair. What this means is that if you don't dig properly, you could theoretically dig yourself into getting stuck if you lack the resources to get out of it. My descents usually ended up being a weird, snaky labyrinth of holes, rather than a straight shot downward to my destination. You have the option to self-destruct to get yourself out of the situation, but that's never optimal. Death in SteamWorld Dig results in you dropping all of your current inventory at the spot of your death, as well as losing half of all gold that you own in general. Much like Dark Souls, there is no bank to store your gold, so you'll be forced to spend your money regularly if you don't want to lose it. Resource management really is the name of the game here. In addition to the obvious timer you're on because of your limited light, knowing when to use your limited water is also an important skill for maximizing the efficiency of each dig. Early on in the game, I was more conservative with the water in an attempt to save it to only dig through stone. But I eased into a more liberal use of it just to get through dirt faster and ended up having much more profitable runs. Not only that, your inventory is limited as well. You begin with only being able to carry 3 types of minerals at a time, so choosing what you want to carry is a decision as well. All of these limitations put just the right amount of stress on you while playing the game in order to nudge you deeper and deeper towards the depths. Thankfully, SteamWorld never bogs itself down with cumbersome inventory menus. When you head back up to town, just talk to the vendor and you will sell all of the minerals in your possession, as well as upgrade the town itself, which is, again, done automatically. This saves you a lot of time and ensures that the time you do spend with the game solely is on that core gameplay loop. There are 3 major zones to the underground within SteamWorld Dig, each more difficult than the last, but thankfully containing a shortcut back to the surface. Enemies get tougher and tougher as you go from zone to zone, and so does the dirt and rock that you have to dig through. The last world is far different than the 2 that come before it, both in tone and gameplay style. It is almost all metal, which means far less spots to dig. Here, you have much less freedom to forge your own path like you could in the early half of the game, but I found it to be a nice contrast as well as a decent challenge. My favorite part about this endgame level is how you can use the world around you to help dig. There are a lot of turrets that will shoot at you if you go near them, and you can try to aim them at the minerals to help you do the digging for you. Definitely cool. You have a very loose set of quests that will guide you through these zones. It will be a broad objective, like trying to find the next world or the next upgrade, and you'll be given the location of the zone that they exist in, but you gotta do the digging to find exactly where it lies. Within these zones, you're gonna find some doors that go to more sectioned off areas of the underground. The world beyond these doors are not randomly generated like the world normally is. Instead, these are crafted rooms that usually serve as puzzles. The puzzles are just the right difficulty, usually forcing you to dig the room into a certain pattern in order to progress. Some of the rooms do have a more slight combat focus, which is less fun than the puzzle rooms. Combat is clearly not the star of the show here. You can use all of your digging items as weapons, but I felt like there was a disconnect between how much damage I felt like I was doing and how much I was actually doing. Specifically the drill. I feel like the drill should shred enemies to pieces really quickly, but sometimes I'd be spinning away for seconds at a time before they finally broke. What's weirder is that the progression of your equipment's damage happens independently of the digging strength. When you upgrade at a shop, you level up ground damage and enemy damage separately. Seems kind of unnecessary. Eventually you will discover a door deep within World 3, locked behind 3 gates powered by 3 generators. The townsfolk will suggest that beyond this door, you may find a great treasure, or perhaps more importantly, information about your Uncle Joe's death. Getting through these gates involves destroying all 3 generators, with one being located within each of the worlds. This requires a small return trip through all of what you've been through so far, and it really brought to light how awesome the sense of progression was. I started again back at the first world, absolutely shredding through all of the dirt and rock in one hit, even with just my pickaxe. I became a certifiable robot badass, and I didn't even realize it. Really awesome. Don't worry, if my description of this generator quest sounds like a daunting retread through the entire game, it's not. You are so powerful by this stage that you can dig your way to these generators in minutes. And finally, the gates have been broken, and behind them, we find Uncle Joe, or at least what remains of him, being absorbed and becoming part of some great robot entity. And thus, the first and last boss fight of the entire game begins. There are generators located around the entire room that you have to destroy, while simultaneously avoiding laser fire from the robot itself. I think the largest missed opportunity here is the fact that the giant pulsating laser that is fired at you does no damage to the generators. I think this fight would have been much cooler if the objective was to try to position yourself to have the robot destroy itself. But the actual fight is far simpler than that. Just run around and smack the generators until they all die. Once it's destroyed, we get a cutscene of the town with a few months having been passed, the townsfolk commemorating the now missing Rusty with a statue. The ending is pretty ambiguous, suggesting that Rusty himself might have absorbed the power of the robot entity he was fighting. It's hard to tell. There isn't much of a story through most of the game, and the ending is no different. What might surprise you is how little time it takes to get to this ending. I beat the game in just under 2.5 hours. I even have this achievement that I wasn't aiming for to prove it. This is definitely a speedrun type of game, as you can tell by this post-game stat screen. You can continue to play the game from your last save before the final boss if you wanted to continue doing some upgrades, but there wasn't any significant content unlocked for beating the game, like a hard mode or anything like that. Most of your replayability will be how much you care about self-imposed challenges and achievements, and since I don't care too much for either of those things, I walked away after my 2.5 hours without doing much more. SteamWorld Dig is a lean game that knows exactly what it is, and it doesn't waste time trying to be anything that it's not. All the focus is on the good aspects of the game, and no tedium gets in your way. The sense of progression, the puzzle-solving mindset you have to adopt while digging, and of course that compelling gameplay loop made the game a pleasant surprise. Some expanding on the game's combat and boss battles could have made the game even better.